with a monster run off turn 2.
Line 2.
Team Penske at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and Josef Newgarden finally wins the Indianapolis 500.
Strategy is defined as a plan of action designed to achieve a particular aim. Finding your winning strategy can happen overnight or can take years to develop. Here on the STRATS podcast, I hang out with athletes, experts, entertainers, and adventurers, some old friends and some new, to hear how they found their edge in a particular field or for a particular event. Expect to hear about motivation, personal struggles and successes, and actionable advice for anyone looking to be better today than they were yesterday. My name is Charles Thorp. My work has allowed me to share stories from the best and the brightest, and now I'm bringing those conversations here.
But you have to be able to live on a subconscious level when you're driving an IndyCar. There's so much that's happening when you're driving the car at 240 miles per hour, and there's 33 other cars around you, and you're on the limit of grip. The car is quite literally just on the edge of disaster.
That was Indy 500 champion Josef Newgarden, and it's time for the STRATS podcast. Josef, such a pleasure to talk to you today, man.
Thank you for taking the time. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be in the audience for that Indy 500. I can now honestly say that there is nothing like it in the world.
Well, I love hearing from first-time attendees because it's something we preach that if you've never been to the Indianapolis 500, it's something you have to go to at some point in your life. You can't describe what it is. You know, Indy has an energy about it. It is a sporting event to me that stands alone. There's nothing like it on the planet for that single day. And you know, we know it. We feel like we're in the fraternity of it because we run it every single year. We know it only gets better, to be quite honest with you. Like the prestige of it, the respect has only grown for me. It also, on the other hand, only gets harder when you don't win it. You know, it's the biggest heartbreak for me. But as just a viewer, as part of the experience of what the Indy 500 is, yeah, it's next level. And I always tell people, you've got to see it once. Just give it one opportunity. I guarantee you will at least have an amazing time. And more than likely, you'll want to come back at another point and see it again.
I feel like we have a really unique situation here where we have someone that has just won the Indy 500. I really want to dig in on the experience of tracking something like this, an accomplishment like this, and what it means to set a goal and have an intention and do the work to see it through.
Well, I'll probably break this down differently than you would anticipate. But for me, this was my 12th attempt. So I've been here a long time. You know, I still feel like a really young guy. I'm 32 years old. I started around here when I was 20. And I definitely have a different perspective. I have much more respect for this event because what I spoke about before, that when you come to Indianapolis year after year and you don't win the race, you just leave more and more heartbroken every single time. And there's only one winner, and winning is the only thing that matters at Indianapolis. You know, it is an event that stands alone. And it's cheesy to say that winning is the only thing that matters, but when it comes to Indianapolis, that is the only thing that matters. So it's so difficult, but you know, people put it on a pedestal. And I think that's what makes it so challenging, is that it's in the middle of a championship that we're racing for. You know, it's in the middle of our season. And any real sporting franchise, that's kind of how it works. You build through a season and you work towards a championship in the finale. And we have, you know, our biggest event in the middle of the year. And when I say it stands alone, I mean that, you know, people speak about the Indianapolis 500 with this thesis that if you don't win the 500, then your career doesn't really matter. It kind of voids it out. It's a failure. I don't subscribe to that. You know, if you're savvy to motorsports and you understand what IndyCar racing is, you know, the championship in a lot of ways to me is more difficult and more gratifying because it is, you know, it is a testament to your consistency and effort throughout an entire season, not just on a single day where there's variables that can go wrong, etc. But the 500 does stand alone in that I think it is the most difficult race to win every year. There's so much pressure and build up to it, and nothing is like it. And so I just look at it with this like biopic lens that they're two different things. And, you know, I've almost had to grieve the 500 before the win this year. And I did do that a couple years ago, where I'd been here enough and I'd done the work. I'd done my preparation. I felt like I knew what was needed to win the race. And the process that I had developed that I felt like is the right process to put in place and try and win the race is essentially what I did this weekend. I didn't change anything from years ago, but what I did change was my attitude towards winning the race. And when I say grieving it, you just have to let go of the fact that you may never win it. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't matter how good you are, or how much funding the team has, or et cetera, how many times you've won it in the past. There's just no guarantee that you're ever going to win it personally. And I think that's what makes it so gratifying to actually succeed at it. That's why we keep coming back. And there's so much more about it. The history of it, the fact that it's the 107th running. I don't know many sporting events that are that many years old in the world, particularly for motorsports. It's special on so many levels.
I'm really curious to hear day of what this experience was for you as a competitor. Can you just take me into what you felt? Maybe we'll even go back to the night before. What you felt, maybe the things that you were doing mentally and physically to make sure that you woke up the next morning prepared to drive.
Yeah, it's a great question. Preparation is so critical in any sport that you're in. I think really any task that you're trying to complete. The more prepared you feel, the better I think you can execute within a moment. The 500 is obviously the most critical for execution when it really matters. It's got to be a perfect day to win the race. And this particular 500, I actually pulled back a lot on what I would maybe traditionally do. I tried to just feel more relaxed than ever, and I just allowed myself to do what came naturally to me. And also, I allowed myself to just sort of roll with a process that I've been building up for many, many years here. I wasn't new to this event. I wasn't new to my internal process of, how are we approaching the race? How are we building the car up? What do we need to do when the race starts? Where do we need to be at the finish? And, what's going to be the ultimate execution point to win at the very end? I knew all those things. And so instead of, crunching last numbers or looking at video over and over again the night before, 2 days before, I just didn't really do anything. I just relaxed. I tried to give myself more mental time to, decompress. And I just was very relaxed the night before, didn't do anything. Got up early in the morning, didn't see anybody. I pretty much stayed in my bus until driver intros. I walked out at about 11:20 with my family, and I went and raced, and I did what I knew I could do naturally. And I think that was big for me. And it kind of comes back to the point I was telling you, where I had to grieve this race in the past. That's how I viewed it. And I think it put me in a really great space to just exactly what I said, go in and do naturally what you know how to do.
It was also fascinating being there on the ground during the Indy 500, because I feel like I started to really understand, or at least get a glimpse of, what you as drivers are going through, competing in the midst of a competition, in the midst of a championship, competing all month long, doing a lot of work leading up to it, and seeing these buses, these tour buses, RVs that you guys are essentially living in for the duration of that month. It's a very unique experience, I'm sure, and a very unique situation for a sportsman to have to live in this controlled circumstance. How have you created an environment or an atmosphere that is conducive to you being your best self? How have you managed that bus? What have you guys put in there to make sure that you're able to get everything you need throughout the month?
We all have our strengths, our weaknesses, or we have our tendencies, and you've really got to understand what works for you. For me, I'm naturally an introvert, and it's a terrible thing to have in the world of motorsports, to be an introvert organically, because that's my natural state, is to not want to be around people, to not be extroverted, to not be, the representative of the team. And that's essentially my job. My job is to not just drive the race car well, not wreck it, when I'm trying to drive it at 240 miles per hour and make all the right decisions, but it's also to be the representative, the captain, the leader. You've got to show strength, not just for the partners, the sponsors, the fans that are cheering your team on, but you're also trying to lead the group off your sole direction. The lifeline that the team has to the car is me. It's weird to look at it that way, but it's so true. I'm the one strapped in the car, and it is very much a team sport, but I have the best feedback. I have the best understanding of what we need to be doing to succeed. Because if I don't like something at the end of the day, or it's not working for me personally, then it's hard for us to make progress. So it's about maximizing the whole group, but figuring out exactly what I need. And I'm trying to give that backstory for people that don't understand motorsports necessarily, just to try and describe what works for me. And for the month of May, it is a mental grind. You show up there, you're literally there for 3 weeks, and it's just day after day. You're working at the track, you're doing commitments 24/7. In racing, it's not just, okay, we're on track practicing from 12 to 6. That's not just it. You wake up at 8 a.m., you have a commitment at 8, you have a commitment at 9, 9:30, 10. It's sponsors, it's all these obligations, and you're just mentally taxed doing that day after day. The Indy 500 is abnormal for that. When you show up to a normal race weekend, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you're out. And that's very draining too. But the 500 is like that on steroids. Like, you just have to do it for 21 days straight. So you can imagine doing that day after day for that much time. And while you're doing that and draining yourself, you're trying to prepare for the biggest moment of the year. And so I've had to learn how to figure out how to contain my energy levels so that by the time I get to race day, I'm not totally out of gas. I don't want to be depleted. And the bus, as you talked about, is kind of our sanctuary. That's how it works for me. So I'm really particular about my calendar and what I'm saying yes to, what I'm not saying yes to, just because it's important to my energy levels and where I need to be on race day. And it's funny, you don't have to do something proprietary or something secretive. Like, for me, it's as simple as, I played Nintendo a little bit more this month. Every month it's different on what we do, and I don't play video games very often, but I thought, this month I'm going to try and play some video games to get my mind off my other activities. And so I did that a lot this month and just took the time in the bus to create that sanctuary environment where I could really look after the energy levels like I talked about.
What was the game of choice on the Nintendo?
I'm going to nerd out here, but Zelda. There's a new Zelda game. I love Nintendo. I was a big Mario fan growing up, and the Zelda game is like never ending. You can get lost. Breath of the Wild was the last one they came out with, and they just came out with Tears of the Kingdom. It's just like a massive open source game where you got this huge map, and you need something like that to just completely remove yourself from the insanity of your day job. That racing is all consuming for me. I mean, I live and breathe my sport. It is the only thing I care about in my life. And you've got to find something to pull yourself out of that, especially when you're so enamored by it of just succeeding and figuring out a way to be better than everybody. There's times where you get sucked into it too much, where you don't know how to remove yourself from it. And for me, the video games this month, they were really helpful to find that balance.
I love that, man. You mentioned that synchronicity with the machine, and it is another unique part about this sport and motorsports in general is it's not just you being ready physically entirely, it's also this machine that you're working with on a constant basis. As far as this particular race and this particular season, can you just describe for people who aren't aware what the machine is that you guys are working with, what maybe makes yours unique, or some of the things that you have found that give you maybe the edge there as well?
I'm going to try and come up with an analogy on the spot here, because I was thinking about this for people that don't understand motorsports, but essentially think of the driver and the race car as one unit. We become symbiotic. We are like the same organism, if you will. And so you're working with a team of people that are responsible for that organism and making sure that it stays alive and that it operates at its full capacity. And you have engineers, mechanics, that's their sole job. And they're relying not only off my feedback, but all this data that streams off this car constantly throughout the month. And so I think the only way I could relate it to, imagine like being an MMA fighter, okay? And your body, you are the race car, and you have all these people that are there to tune your body, and you're fighting every day, and you're trying to optimize your arms, your calves, your legs, your abs, your core. Like, just think about all these components that you would need within a fight. And really, the best feedback that you're going to get is from that actual fighter. You could have all this, if he was a robot and you had all this data streaming off, and you'd have all the engineers picking it apart and saying, I don't think this is optimized, or we need to change the jab here, we need to change your reaction time or your hook. etc. But then you're going to get the real feedback from the driver, that the actual perception of what he thinks is best. And at the end of the day, whatever the fighter thinks is going to be best for him is ultimately what should work. And so that's the same thing with the race car driver. You know, the engineer can analyze things up and down and say, I recommend doing this. I think this is going to be optimized for the race car. But the really good race car drivers intuitively know exactly what needs to happen to make them happy. Because at the end of the day, if I'm not happy and I don't feel confident in the car, then I can't get the most out of it. And it doesn't matter what the heck the data is streaming off the car and saying. So it's a very unique relationship to have. And I love that side of it because it's so important to be locked in with your team and to excel in that department. That's where the greats really, become better than the rest.
And just give us statistics as far as your vehicle in particular that you won this Indy 500 with.
Yeah, it's amazing the advancement in technology that we have with these Indy cars nowadays. They're open wheel cars. They're pushing nearly 800 horsepower now. They make around 2,900 pounds of downforce. So think of it as a reverse jet fighter. You're literally just flipping it on its lid, and it is literally glued to the racetrack is what it's doing. And so you're trying to optimize the amount of grip that the car creates in the corner and how much speed you can have in a straight line. And you can't have both. You really have to find the balance there of how fast the car is going to go on a straightaway versus how quickly it can go in the corner. And so you're constantly optimizing all this stuff and trying to be better than 33 other people. And if you think about just from a closeness standpoint and how insanely tight the competition is in IndyCar right now, literally the pole winner to second place was separated by 2 inches. 2 inches. So they have to do 4 laps to qualify for this race. And each lap is 2.5 miles. So it's 10 miles of distance that you do to qualify. And the gap between first and second place is a couple inches. That's the difference. And you're doing 240 plus miles per hour. So I can't even, sometimes when I put it in those terms, I can't wrap my head around the details. Like if you breathe differently or you made one small adjustment that was the wrong way, it's just crazy how close it is. And that's, you live on that edge. You live on the edge of putting the car on pole by getting it perfect, or disaster where you did something wrong and you end up in the wall. But that's what makes it fun.
As someone that was allowed to ride on the track and experience it with some of the young IndyCar drivers, they had us do that open wheel experience, the 2-seater experience.
Oh, amazing!
So I got to do a couple laps at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which was just incredible. And again, we weren't going the same speeds you guys are going, but we were getting up there. And for just someone that's been used to, I've driven some fast cars before, but there's definitely a moment where I was thinking way too much. I was thinking, again, what if we go out of control? There's that element of there, and I know the safety protocols that are in place right now just keep on advancing, and IndyCar is doing a great job with that. But there is this is unnatural, this amount of speed. And there's so many things that if I was piloting this car, you would be having to think about. And obviously that's what you guys work on. But can you just describe a little bit about the mental state of a driver competing at the Indy 500? Are you in a flow state? Are you acknowledging every turn you're making? Are there decisions that are happening that are planned 5 seconds before? Or are there decisions that you're making almost in that moment immediately? I'm guessing maybe both. Just try to give me an insight, if you can, into that experience for you as a driver.
It's definitely both. The Indianapolis 500 was really created around testing the limits of machine performance and human performance together in tandem, right? And that's what it's all about. We developed and built commercial road vehicles around the Indy 500. That's why it's so historic. Right as we were inventing a road car, this is when this race, came into existence. It's over 100 years old. So it's a very special event from that standpoint. And, absolutely there you have to be able to live on a subconscious level of ability when you're driving an Indy car at Indianapolis. There are some things that you're very front of mind, you're thinking of currently, it's premeditated, like you're doing this in advance, the way that you're thinking about something or looking for. But there's so much that's happening when you're driving the car at 240 miles per hour, and there's 33 other cars around you and you're on the limit of grip, the car is quite literally, it's just on the edge of disaster because you're trying to get the most performance out of it. And so there's so much that's happening that you're reacting to. The front of the car is sliding, the rear of the car is sliding, you're an inch away from someone else, you're floating to the turn 4 wall at 240 miles per hour. There's all these micro adjustments that you're doing constantly in the car that are just subconscious, that you've trained yourself to understand and react to subconsciously. And so that's happening, a tremendous amount in tandem with your conscious decisions too, things that you're actively thinking about and trying to stay ahead of. And, I think for us, you've got to be wired just a little different because there's an inherent risk to driving race cars at 240 plus miles per hour. It's not great to speak about in these terms, but the possibility of getting killed in one of these cars is always prevalent. It is always going to be there. The safety of our sport has trended in this incredible direction over the years where you feel almost invincible when you're in the cars. You feel like there's every safety feature imaginable and that there's nothing that could go substantially wrong. But the reality is it could. And so you've got to be just a little different from a mental standpoint where you can switch off that concern switch and just focus on the task at hand, both, consciously and subconsciously. And it's not easy to do. Some of that is trainable, but I think you have to have an innate ability to do that to some degree. And then you're trying to just improve that ability over time. But I don't think you can fully just teach it to somebody. It's a hard thing to get your head around.
Yeah, it's not like a masterclass course that you can hit. Just like detaching from that concern that most people I think might have in those vehicles. There was a lot that was happening in this race. This race was also very challenging on the drivers. There were a lot of incidents on the track. As a spectator, everyone has instant concern for the drivers. If an incident occurs, you're piloting this car at 240 miles per hour. When are you becoming aware that these incidents are happening? Just tell me about like the actual infrastructure there for you as a driver. Are you noticing them on the track in real time, in reality, in your peripheral? Are you getting word through your headset, oh, hey, there's been an incident, slow down? Tell me about some of those things and those adjustments that you make in that moment to make sure that everybody on the track is safe. Because I'm always, and I think a lot of people are, fascinated that some of these things don't turn out worse than they do. The cars behind them making those micro adjustments, missing the other cars, avoiding a pile up, I guess, per se, or a greater incident.
Yeah, really all of the above. Look, I mean, I've been in races where I've had a friend, that was in a wreck and they didn't survive. It's the tough side of the sport, and it doesn't happen often. I mean, it's more rare, than common. And it's due to the safety advancement that we've had year after year in IndyCar. But the reality and the possibility is always there. When you have situations that happen on the track, when there's a wreck either in front of you or behind you, you're really aware of it, and in a twisted way. And really, this is naturally how I think it is for most drivers. You're fighting two different thought processes. The immediate thought you have is, if it's a bad wreck or it visually looks negative, then you're very concerned right away for the outcome of that. Especially the more you've been in it, the more you've seen, the more you really are just concerned on the safety of everybody that was involved and making sure that it turned out. And then you have this other thought, which is completely conflicting, and you go, okay, well, where was the position of them? Were they in front of me? Did I just gain positions? Okay, well, that's 2 other people or 3 other people or 1 other person that I don't have to worry about. And that's it's almost a sick way to look at it, but it's a natural thought for a competitor. And so you live between these 2 extremes where your heart is completely pushed out to whoever was there, and you want to just make sure more than anything that they're okay, but then you're still locked in completely to the task at hand. And so you fight those things, and that's me being completely honest. I think most drivers would agree with that. They might not say it openly, but that's pretty much what goes through your mind. And it's difficult. There's so many different scenarios or situations that we could dive into. They could be small wrecks. They could be a lot of people, etc. They're all very different, but it happens a lot, and it's part of the sport. And there's nothing that we would love more than to eliminate the risk, but it's just never going to happen. I think that's also the thrill of motorsport, is that you are inherently risking something. You're testing the limits of something. And that's what people are there to watch too. It's not necessarily a gladiator situation where you want to see something go wrong, but you like to see something that is, being put on the edge, and you like to see people testing the limits.
Yeah, man, I think you guys could slow these cars down to 150 and have that be the limit, and then that's not peak performance in neither the person or the machines. And I think that's another thing that we key in on, and just being in the pit, watching you guys go by, just knowing how fast you guys are going and the things that you guys are chasing. That's what makes it so exciting for the fans on the actual track as well. That's what makes it so captivating to watch live. To be able to perform in those moments where you're being tested either to avoid something or to gain a position. I'd love to key in on the physical element too. I know that's something you care about. And obviously the machine has to be running well. You need to be running well. Can you just tell me a little bit about maybe the training that you do that's specific to you succeeding in the sport, and maybe some of the things that you did this season in particular that maybe have given you that edge to come out victorious?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a topic I could talk about a lot. It's so important in racing, much more than most anybody realizes. I think there's a misconception when you watch racing on TV, or even if you go to the track and you see it. I think there's a little more respect when you see it in person. You go, okay, wow, that's more impressive than probably I realized watching on the TV. But it is a physically demanding sport. It's mentally demanding. They're very intrinsically linked. And so I think the more physically prepared you are, the more mentally prepared you can be, and vice versa. They play off each other. Just strictly speaking from the numbers, they're extremely capable race cars. They're capable of cornering at insane speeds that commercial road vehicles wouldn't even get close to. So you're susceptible to up to 6 Gs of forces, whether that's, vertically or laterally. At Indy, we're getting a lot of lateral G through the corner, and, the typical force is around 3.5 G, and you're getting that, 4 times a lap. It's funny, Indianapolis is actually one of the least physical tracks that we go to. There are other tracks that are insanely physical, but Indianapolis, funny enough, is, I think, the most mentally taxing, which can also just wreak havoc on you physically. So just to touch on the physical side, for me, it's really important. I've tried to be a good all-arounder. It's hard to train to drive an IndyCar. The best training that you can get is actually driving the car. If I could just get repetitions inside the car, then I'm going to be training the exact muscle groups, the exact psychological things that I need to be focused in manipulating, my breath work, etc. You can't replicate driving the car. So if I'm going to train physically outside the car, I just wanted to be well-rounded. And so that meant I want to be good at any sport possible, whether it's, long distance, it's short distance, it's powerlifting, it's endurance training, muscularly, whatever it is. If it's a circuit training session, if I want to jump into a CrossFit class, I didn't care. I just wanted to be really good at everything. And so for me, that always started with great base strength. I wanted to feel strong in the race car. There's a limit to that. If I weigh over 185 pounds, I'm taking a penalty in the car. So we essentially ballast every driver up to 185. As long as you're under that, you're not heavy. If you're over 185, you're going to be heavier than the competition. So you can only put on so much base strength. I try and get as strong as possible, and then I try and look after my cardiovascular system in a couple different ways. I want my base cardio to be really, really strong, so that if we're just doing, low heart rate, long endurance stuff, I have that really strong base cardio. But then I've also got that flex in there where I can expand my cardio and put it into muscular form, and I can do repetitions. If you want me to squat, 185 pounds on my back, I can do that over and over and over again. Or if I'm deadlifting, whatever, 225, I can do that repetition over and over and over. Those are probably too heavy of weights to really get the idea, but I think the IndyCar is very in the middle there. You have this high overall threshold capability of great strength, but the higher that is, the better middle ground it gives you to be able to do that middle ground work over and over and just never fall off. And I kind of relate that somewhat to CrossFit in a way, because you got to find that really nice middle ground where you have this huge peak, but you can just live in the middle there forever. And whoever's the best at that just doesn't fade. And I think in the race, you kind of have to live in that middle spot and just be really comfy.
Yeah, so when it comes to that physical aspect, how do you implement that in the gym? Do you have a trainer that you work with, or do you have kind of your own program that you've created over the years?
Yeah, I have a strength coach that I've worked with for a long time out of Indianapolis, and he builds a great program for me. So, typically it goes in the off season when I have a lot of time off out of the car, I'm just trying to put on max strength. So I'm lifting super heavy, just trying to build up my peak performance. I'm still doing some cardio, some base cardio, a little bit of interval training, but it's mostly just maximal strength work. And then as we get closer to the race season, we just start dialing in more specific work. Like, okay, we're going to bring the weights down. We're going to get more in that middle zone and figure out how to bring endurance into this muscular form. And then we start really layering in like heavy cardio stuff. Interval training is a pretty easy hitter for us. It just kind of incorporates everything. I love rowing, especially Concept 2 machines. Like, I think they're probably the best thing that you can jump on for a race car driver, whether it's the row erg or the ski erg. I even love their bike erg now too, and I throw that in. But the row or ski erg is just incredible because it's so full body. There are two different chains you're working on there, but they're both really full body and taking, so much out of you cardiovascularly that you just have to be good at everything to maximize those machines. So we start layering that in pretty aggressively right before we get to race season. And then during the race season, it's really all about maintenance. I can't make any gains. I'm too taxed during the year to try and physically, get myself to a better place in the gym. So I'm just trying to not drop off too much. I lose a little bit of muscle mass, I'll probably lose 5 or 7 pounds of muscle mass throughout the year just because I don't eat enough or, I don't sleep well enough, etc. I mean, the Indy 500 is definitely going to wreak a little bit of havoc on me. I've had a bad 3 days here. I'll probably have another bad week. And so you're just trying to not fade as much as possible all the way to the finish, and then we'll build right back up again in the off season.
We're at the Indy 500 now. You've been hanging out in your sanctuary, in your bus, and then you exit. Take me into race day. What's the experience of that? Is it meetings? When are you getting in the car? When are you having that first experience on the track?
I think one of the greatest things about the team I drive for, Team Penske, is that they essentially leave us alone on race day for only the Indy 500. This is totally unique. The typical demand of a race weekend, we're there 3 days, Fridays practice, Saturdays qualifying, the race is on Sunday. And on race day, typically you're busy all the way from the morning up. So I wake up at, 7:30, 8 a.m. I'll have warm up, which will be 30, 45 minutes on track. And then I'll go into a post engineering debrief. I'll have to go into a strategy meeting. I'll have to go to 2 hospitality appearances to see our partners. Then I'll do 2 meet and greets at the car. Then I'll probably do, a fan Q&A. And then I'll come back for one more engineering meeting. Then I get to go to the race. That is a normal race weekend for race day. The Indy 500, they kill us, they burn us out all the way to race day, and they say, you know what, it's race day for the 500, we're going to leave you alone until you get in the car. So for my process, I just I wake up a little bit later. If I can, I try and get up at maybe 8 o'clock, 8:30. I have a really relaxed morning. I get my breakfast in. My family arrives at the track. I hang out with everybody. And then I wait for call time. Call time is typically 11:20, 11:30. We walk out to the green room. We get introduced, and I get in the car. And, I kept it more relaxed than ever this year. But I always appreciated that they left us alone. One time out of the year they leave us alone is for the Indy 500. And they just know, it's the biggest day. And they want to give us a good opportunity.
We mentioned how unique the crowds are, and that experience is the roar of the crowd. There's nothing like it. I was so glad that I came prepared with earplugs. There were a lot of people who didn't, because you are just surrounded by noise. Even with earplugs in there, it's creeping through. Take me into that moment of putting on your helmet, where you go from this roar. Everyone's excited for the race to start. It's game on. The helmet's on. I'm guessing there's some quiet that comes with that. Tell me about that experience, and then strapping into the car.
Yeah, I think I faded everything out this year more than normal. What you're describing, that pre-race ceremony, it's unlike anywhere else. It's during Memorial Day weekend. So the camaraderie of the Americans within that infield and honoring our troops, just being able to run that race and live in this free country, that's kind of what the weekend's all about. And Indianapolis likes to celebrate that to the highest level. And it's just a build of, 45 minutes to an hour of just building, these ceremonies and this, beautiful pageantry. And the crowd is just next level on every little thing that happens. They play taps, the whole deal, back home again in Indiana. And this year, I more than ever, I tuned out a lot to that whole atmosphere. I got in the car. and I wasn't even really looking at the crowds in the stands, and it's impossible to not see it. I mean, there's nearly 500,000 people there, and especially when the front straight clears out and we take off, it's easy to absorb all the people and see the enormity of the event. And I just tried to stay really locked in on, let's run the race. I'm going to do what I've done 11 times before, and I want to do it today better than ever. And I just focused in on that moment. And, I found myself being able to do that better this year. I don't know why. Maybe it's that process that I was talking about.
I think obviously there's a lot of moments and moves that we could key in on. People can watch the video, but let's talk about that last lap. Was that a move that you anticipated being able to make? Tell me about finding that moment of opportunity and then what it felt like to cross that line and know that you had become Indy 500 champion.
It was super reactionary at the end. I think that's almost how you have to attack it. You can't ever predict 100% what's going to happen in these races, particularly at the end, right? So if you find yourself on an opportunity where you could potentially win it, and to be in that opportunity, you've got to be in the top 5. When it really comes down to the shootout, you've been working all day to hopefully be in that top group. And so when you're up there and it's coming down to a last lap shootout, you just can't predict exactly how it's going to go. And so I think you've got to have, on one hand, a start strategy and say, this is my preference of what I think is going to happen and what I'm going to do. But you got to be super open-minded. You can't be just locked in and glued to that one commitment, because as soon as something changes and you've got to alter, you got to be super flexible and ready to just jump to the next line. And so for me, I was in that zone where I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I know I have to get by him as quickly as possible. That didn't happen. I didn't pass him into turn 1 in the last lap shootout. And I thought, okay, this is actually good that it's happened this way. I'm going to get him off turn 2 on the back straight. And that's going to put me in position to be at the line first for the checkered flag. That's exactly what happened. And I flipped my plan, got by him, held him off, and we won the race. So I just can't describe to you how elevating it feels. I just feel relieved. The pressure of this race that everyone puts on it, it flies right off of you. That pressure that people put on you when you're finally able to see the checker flag first.
When did you actually realize that you won the race? Did you know immediately? Did it take a second to process all that?
It sunk in right away. I knew about 100 foot before the finish line. I said, we're winning. I just can't describe the emotion. I've never experienced it before. I've won 26 races before this, and this one was so insanely different feeling. Yeah, it was right away. I didn't want it to stop. It was magical. It was magical.